The wind howled through the empty plains, carrying dust and sand that stung Maribel's eyes and clawed at her skin. She huddled beneath a loose stack of hay in the old barn, shivering from both cold and exhaustion. Her small frame seemed swallowed by the shadows, the creaking beams above her groaning with every gust of wind. Outside, the moonlight slanted through the cracks in the wood, painting ghostly stripes across the hay. Every sound, the scuttling of rats, the rattling of a loose shutter, the distant howl of coyotes made her flinch. She hadn't meant to stay here overnight. The fire at her family's homestead had driven her from home, and the town's folk had turned their backs. The barn had seemed like a temporary haven, a place where she could disappear without being noticed. She tried to make herself smaller, curling into a ball, hugging her thin knees and pulling her worn shawl tighter around her shoulders. The smell of hay was faintly sweet, mixed with the earthy scent of the barn itself. But it wasn't enough to soothe the gnawing fear inside her chest. Every creak of the wood or whisper of wind made her flinch. Imagining shadows stretching into claws that might reach for her, Maribel's thoughts drifted to the past, the fire, the flames that had consumed her family home, the screams, heat that had seared her memory. Even now, months later, she could feel the heat in her lungs when she remembered, taste the smoke on her tongue. She had nowhere to go. Every door she had knocked on had been shut in her face. She was alone, utterly alone, and the world outside felt as hostile as the flames that had taken her family. A sudden creak made her freeze. The barn door shifted slightly, as if pushed by some unseen force. Her heart skipped a beat, every instinct screaming at her to hide. She pressed herself deeper into the shadows, holding her breath, trying to disappear completely. Then came the sound of boots on the wooden floor, slow and deliberate. The noise wasn't frantic, it wasn't hurried, it carried the weight of someone confident, someone who belonged. Maribel's chest tightened. The shadows in the barn seemed to grow darker, the haystack pressing closer around her. She closed her eyes, wishing she could vanish entirely. "Why are you sleeping in the barn?" The voice was low, smooth, but carried an unmistakable authority. It vibrated through the wooden walls and seemed to settle in her chest. Maribel opened her eyes cautiously. Standing in the doorway was a giant figure, tall and broad-shouldered, muscles shadowed by the moonlight. His skin was bronzed and marked by countless lines of sun and wind, his hair long and black, falling loosely past his shoulders. Beads of leather and small charms glimmered faintly against his chest. Before she could answer, the man stepped closer. His presence was overwhelming, yet there was something calm in the way he moved. Without warning, rough but gentle hands lifted her from the haystack. She was off the ground before she could scream, her tiny body held effortlessly as though she weighed nothing. The scent of smoke, earth, and something wild filled her senses. Maribel's fear didn't disappear, but it shifted, mingling with a strange sense of awe. His dark eyes studied her carefully, not with anger or suspicion, but with curiosity. "You shouldn't be out here alone," he said, his voice like gravel softened by warmth. "The plains are not kind to girls without shelter." I didn't have anywhere else," she whispered, her voice trembling. She felt the steady beat of his heart beneath her cheek as he held her close, and something inside her, a part that had long been numbed by loss, tugged at hope. He didn't speak again immediately. Instead, he turned, stepping through the barn door and into the night. The wind tugged at their clothes, whipping dust around their feet. Yet in his arms, Maribel felt protected in a way she hadn't since the fire. The vast plain stretched before them, dangerous and open, yet for the first time, she didn't feel entirely alone. The giant Apache's name, she would later learn, was Tayan. And in that instant, under the silver sweep of moonlight and the whisper of the wind through the barn, Their lives intersected in a way that would change them both forever. A new story was beginning, one forged in the dust of the Old West, with danger, hope, and the fragile promise of connection at its heart. Tayan carried Maribel across the plains as the first hints of dawn painted the sky in soft pinks and oranges. Her small fingers clutched his arm, trembling not just from the chill of the night but from the awe of his presence. The wind tugged at her hair and dust clung to the folds of her shawl. She had never seen a man like him, tall, solid, with shoulders that seemed to hold the weight of the world. Every movement he made was deliberate, calm, and measured, as if he belonged to the land itself. The plains stretched endlessly around them. The tall grasses shimmered in the morning light, bending under the wind like waves on a green sea. Red rocks jutted from the earth in jagged formations, glowing as the sun crept higher. Eagles circled above, their cries slicing through the morning stillness. Maribel tried to keep her voice steady. "Where are we going?" she asked, her throat tight. Tayan didn't answer immediately. He moved with the silent confidence of someone who had walked these lands for decades. Finally, he spoke, his voice deep and calm, almost a song in its rhythm. "There is a place," he said, "where the water is clear and the earth will not hide danger from you. We will be safe there." Maribel nodded, unsure if she believed him, but the warmth of his arms around her offered a fragile sense of reassurance. The air smelled of dust, grass, and something smoky, perhaps remnants of last night's fire or Tayan's own camp. The scent was foreign yet grounding, like a tether to a world she had almost lost out. As they walked, Tayan began to speak in short, deliberate sentences about the land. "The wind tells stories," he said, pointing to the grasses bending in a certain direction. "The river sings of what passes. The stones remember what you forget." Maribel listened, fascinated. His words felt like a secret map of the world, a key to understanding the wild, untamed places she had always feared. Found herself talking too, words spilling out of her as if the open air could carry her grief away. She spoke of the fire that had taken her home, of the townspeople who had refused her help, and of the nights she had spent curled under hay or behind fences, listening to the wind. Tayan listened silently, sometimes nodding, sometimes glancing ahead, always holding her with an unshakable presence. The sun climbed higher, painting the canyon walls ahead in gold and crimson. Tayan guided her along a narrow path carved by centuries of wind and rain. The rocks created shadows that shifted and danced, and Maribel imagined the canyon was alive, breathing around them. A hawk soared overhead, and she flinched, startled by the sound of its wings. Tayan chuckled softly, a low rumble that vibrated through her chest. "It is curious," he said, "how even the small things can frighten us until we understand them." Hours passed. They stopped at a small plateau overlooking a river winding like a silver ribbon through the canyon. Tayan knelt and gestured for Maribel to sit beside him. The water glinted in the sunlight, reflecting the sky and the red rocks. She knelt beside him, hesitating, then cupped her hands to drink. The water was cold and sweet, a taste so pure it made her eyes water. "You must always respect it," Tayan said. "It gives life, and it can take it. The land listens to those who listen to it." Maribel felt the weight of his words settle over her, mingling with the awe she felt for the man who carried her through this dangerous, beautiful world. When she looked up at him, she noticed the lines in his face, the shadows beneath his eyes, and the faint scar across his cheek. It told a story she could not yet understand, a story of battles fought and survived, of solitude endured. For the first time since the fire, Maribel did not feel small or insignificant. Here, in the expanse of the plains, with this powerful, watchful man by her side, she felt seen. Tayan stood, offering his hand. "We move again," he said. "The canyon will guide us and the land will protect us if we listen." Maribel took his hand, and for the first time she felt the thrill of not knowing exactly what would come next, but trusting that she would not face it alone. The wind picked up once more, carrying dust and the scent of sage. Maribel held tightly to Tayan as they descended into the canyon, two souls navigating a world as wild and unforgiving as the fire that had taken her home, but with the faint, growing certainty that perhaps, together, they could survive it. By late afternoon, the sun hung low over the canyon, casting the red rock cliffs in a fiery glow that seemed to set the land itself ablaze. Tayan moved with quiet confidence, guiding Maribel through narrow paths carved into the stone by centuries of wind and rain. Her small hands brushed against the rough walls, feeling their warmth, and for a moment she imagined the canyon alive, watching them, aware of every step. "Is it far?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. She had walked hours already, fatigue beginning to weigh on her legs, but the thought of water and shelter gave her a fragile energy. Tayan glanced down at her, a faint smile brushing his lips. "Not far," he said. His eyes, dark and steady, scanned the cliffs as though reading a map invisible to anyone else. "Soon you will see." The path opened suddenly, and before her eyes lay a hidden spring tucked into a crescent of rocks, like a secret jewel. The water shimmered in the late sun, a perfect mirror reflecting the orange and purple sky. Wildflowers, delicate and bright, grew along its banks, bending toward the water as if drawn by some unseen force. The scent of wet earth and fresh water filled the air, mingling with the subtle aroma of sage carried on the breeze. Maribel knelt at the edge, cupping her hands to drink. The water was cold, sharp, and pure, and as it slid down her throat, her body seemed to awaken from exhaustion. She had never tasted anything so clean, so alive. For a moment, she closed her eyes, letting the water wash away some of the fear and grief that had clung to her since the fire. Tayan knelt beside her, cupping water in his own hands. He let her drink first, watching her with an intensity that made her heart flutter in a way she didn't understand. "The land provides," he said quietly. "It is not cruel when it is understood." She looked up at him, noticing for the first time the faint scars on his arms, the leather straps crossing his chest, the small beads that caught the sun. Everything about him spoke of survival, of battles fought and endured. Yet in his presence she felt a warmth she had thought lost forever. The fear that had lodged itself deep in her chest loosened just enough to let her breathe. "Why are you helping me?" she asked, curiosity edged with vulnerability. "You don't know me." Tayan's gaze remained on the spring. "Because you are here," he said finally, almost as if the words were obvious. "Because you need it. Because the land does not reject those who respect it, and neither should I." She considered this, letting it sink in. For so long she had been alone, wandering through a world that seemed indifferent to her existence. But here, in this hidden canyon, beside a spring that felt more like magic than water, she realized something she hadn't dared to hope, that someone could care. Hours passed as the sun dipped lower, painting the canyon walls in deeper shades of crimson and purple. Maribel explored the edges of the spring, letting her fingers brush over smooth stones and wildflowers. Tayan remained vigilant, his dark eyes scanning the cliffs and distant plains. Even here, in this hidden paradise, the world beyond was unpredictable and wild-eyed as the first stars began to shimmer in the sky. Tayan started a small fire near the spring, careful to keep it contained. The smoke smelled of cedar and sage, mingling with the scent of water and earth. Maribel curled next to it, letting the warmth seep into her frozen limbs. Tayan sat across from her, his silhouette massive and protective against the flickering flames. "I never thought I would find a place like this," she whispered. Her voice trembled slightly, carrying the weight of months spent in fear and isolation. I feel safe." "You are safe," Tayan said, his tone firm but gentle, "as long as you stay close. The land protects those who respect it, but I will protect you too." She looked at him, studying the lines of his face in the firelight, the strength in his shoulders, the calm in his eyes. And for the first time, she believed that maybe, just maybe, the worst of her life was behind her. Canyon was quiet except for the soft gurgle of the spring, the occasional rustle of the wind through the rocks, and the crackle of the fire. In that hidden place, suspended between sky and stone, water and earth, Maribel felt a fragile but undeniable hope. She had found not just safety, but a guide, a protector, and perhaps the beginnings of a family she never thought she would. Have again. Tayn watched her settle, sensing her trust growing. The world outside was still dangerous, but here, for this night at least, they were alone together, and the canyon, the spring, and the vast plains beyond promised that life could be more than fear and loss. The afternoon sky darkened abruptly, clouds rolling over the canyon like a blanket of shadow. Maribel squinted, trying to see through the sudden gloom as a sharp gust of wind whipped dust and loose leaves into her face. The air smelled of ozone and dry earth, a warning carried on the wind that danger was near. She shivered, hugging herself tightly, and glanced at Tayn. He was calm, as always, muscles tensed beneath bronzed skin, eyes scanning the horizon with unerring precision. His long black hair whipped around his face, and beads clinked faintly against leather straps on his chest. "We must move," he said, his voice steady but urgent. "A storm comes. Not all of it is rain." Maribel tried to match his pace, her legs aching from the trek through the canyon. The wind tugged at her shawl, threatening to pull it from her shoulders, and she stumbled over jagged rocks. Tayan's hand shot out instantly, steadying her, holding her with the strength of someone who could lift a boulder effortlessly. His grip was firm but gentle, grounding her against the chaos of the wind. Thunder cracked overhead, rolling through the cliffs like a drumbeat. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the jagged canyon walls and the vast expanse of plains beyond. Maribel gasped at the sight, her heart hammering. It's everywhere," she whispered, voice trembling. Tayan did not answer, only motioned toward a narrow cave partially hidden by a jutting rock. "There," he said. "We will wait there until it passes." He moved like a shadow, swift and unerring, and Maribel followed, trying not to fall behind. Inside the cave, the air was cooler, the darkness swallowing them in a protective silence. The roar of the storm outside became muffled, replaced by the constant drumming of rain on stone and the occasional crash of thunder echoing through the canyon. Maribel sank to the ground, wrapping her arms around herself. Her small frame trembled, not entirely from cold. The storm's fury mirrored the fear that had followed her for months, the same fear that had kept her huddled in barns and abandoned homes. Tayan crouched beside her, his massive silhouette a wall of protection against the shadows. "It will pass," he said, voice low, more a promise than an observation. "The storm is loud, but it cannot reach what it cannot touch." Maribel looked at him, noticing the way his chest rose and fell steadily, the faint scars on his arms, the leather straps and beads that marked him as someone who had survived much more than she could imagine. Despite the fear gnawing at her, a small spark of trust kindled inside her. For the first time in a long while, she felt a sense of safety, not complete, but enough to breathe. Outside, lightning split the sky again, illuminating the cave-in. Sharp, fleeting bursts. She saw Tayan's eyes glint in the light, dark and steady, and the powerful line of his jaw. There was no trace of panic, no hint of fear. He seemed to be a part of the land itself, unshackable, unmovable, yet aware of every sound, every flicker of movement. The storm raged on, but inside the cave, a fragile warmth settled between them. Taeyeon gathered small stones and built a fire, careful to shield it from the wind and rain. The scent of smoke mingled with wet stone and earth, creating a strange comfort against the chaos outside. Maribel watched the flames dance, mesmerized, and felt her heartbeat slow slightly as she realized that she was not alone. "You are very brave," Taeyeon said softly, as if reading her thoughts. "To face the storm and the wind and still keep moving forward." Maribel's eyes widened. "Brave?" she echoed. "I'm scared all the time." "And yet you keep moving," he replied. "That is courage, even if it feels like fear." His words hung in the air, steady and unyielding, like the canyon walls themselves. Hours passed. The storm gradually lost its fury, thunder rolling more faintly, rain turning to gentle drizzles that pattered against the cave stone walls. Maribel leaned against Taeyeon, feeling his warmth seep into her bones. For the first time, she allowed herself to relax completely, trusting the giant who had carried her through fire, plains, and now a storm. Outside, the world was still wild, still unpredictable. But inside that small cave, among the scent of wet stone, smoke, and sage, Maribel realized something she hadn't dared before. She was beginning to belong somewhere. And in Taeyeon's calm presence, she understood that she might never have to face the wilderness alone again. The storm had passed by the time dawn broke, leaving the canyon washed in silver light and glistening puddles. Maribel rubbed her eyes, still shivering from the night, and glanced at Taeyeon. He stood at the edge of the cave, massive and alert, muscles taut, eyes scanning the horizon. His long black hair clung to damp skin, beads glinting faintly in the pale morning sun. Even after the storm, he seemed inseparable from the land itself, a sentinel molded by wind and stone. Maribel's stomach growled softly. The storm had left them hungry, but the warrior didn't speak of food, only of movement. "We must continue," he said simply, voice steady, eyes unwavering. She nodded and followed him down the canyon path, every step cautious, her eyes flicking to the shadows that still clung to the rocks. The world seemed reborn after the storm. The dust had settled, the air smelled of wet stone and sage, and the grasses shimmered with dew. Yet the calm of morning carried its own tension. Taeyeon moved like a shadow over the rocks, alert for dangers unseen. Maribel's curiosity bubbled up despite the cautious silence. "Where do you know this land from?" she asked, keeping her voice low. Taeyeon glanced at her briefly. "I have walked it longer than most can remember," he said. "I know the wind, the water, the songs of the land. They guide me." She shivered, partly from the lingering chill, partly from awe. There was something in the way he spoke, a connection to the wilderness she could feel, though she did not yet understand it. He seemed to carry the land itself in his presence strong. Untamed and ancient. As they rounded a bend in the canyon, a sudden movement froze them both. On a ridge across the valley, a lone rider appeared, silhouetted against the rising sun. Maribel squinted, trying to make out details. The rider dismounted slowly, a black horse shifting beneath him. Taeyeon crouched slightly behind a boulder, hand brushing Maribel's hair back with a gentle yet protective touch. "Who is that?" she whispered. Fear and curiosity mingled in her chest. "Not all strangers are enemies," Taeyeon murmured, though his eyes were sharp, assessing every motion. "But we must be cautious." The stranger moved toward the spring below them, seemingly unaware of their presence. Maribel noticed his eyes scanning the water, and the way his posture suggested both wariness and purpose. He carried no visible weapon, yet Taeyeon's posture hinted at readiness. the silent tension of a man accustomed to sudden violence. Maribel's pulse quickened. She had never seen danger so close, yet the stranger seemed different. Not overtly hostile, but unpredictable. "What should we do?" she asked. Tay, and single quotes as hand tightened around hers. "Wait. Watch. Learn." His voice was low, deliberate. He shifted slightly, keeping both of them hidden, his muscles coiled like spring-loaded stone. The wind carried the faint scent of leather and dust from the stranger, and Maribel realized how easily a single figure could alter the balance of the plains. Minutes passed. The stranger knelt by the water, running his hands through it as if testing its depth. He did not yet notice them. Maribel's breath caught. The water sparkled in the morning light, reflecting both their own hidden position and the uncertainty of what might come next. Tayan finally spoke, his tone soft but commanding. "He is not leaving yet. We must be ready, but not reckless. The land tells us when to act, not fear." Maribel nodded, gripping the beads on his leather straps instinctively, feeling the weight of both his strength and his caution. For the first time since the fire had taken her home, Maribel understood something. The world beyond safety was wild, dangerous, and unpredictable. Yet with Tayan beside her, she also felt a strange confidence, a sense that they could face it together. The plains were vast, the canyon walls imposing, and yet in the rising sun and the quiet vigilance of a giant warrior, hope shimmered like the silver of the spring. They waited, shadows against stone, as the stranger finished at the water and stood. Tayan's dark eyes followed his every movement, muscles coiled and ready. Maribel hugged herself, feeling the weight of the unknown. Pressing against the calm of dawn, knowing that this encounter, this stranger, might change everything. The canyon stretched before them, bathed in the soft glow of morning. Tayan led Maribel along narrow paths worn smooth by centuries of wind and wildlife. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of sage, wet earth, and distant pine. Every step seemed deliberate, every glance at the horizon measured. Maribel followed closely, her small hands brushing over rough rocks, absorbing the textures of the land she had never truly known. "You must learn to listen," Tayan said, his deep voice blending with the whisper of the wind through the grasses. "The plains speak. The rivers, the stones, even the trees, they have stories. If you do not listen, you are blind." Maribel frowned, concentrating on the soft rustle of the grass and the distant cry of a hawk. "Stories?" she asked. Tayan nodded. "Not words," he explained. "Signs. The wind changes before a storm. Birds fly differently when danger is near. The earth remembers every footstep. You must see with more than your eyes." As they walked, he showed her the subtle cues of the wilderness. A broken branch indicated the passage of a deer. A fresh scrape on a rock suggested a predator's presence. Maribel bent low, examining the ground, amazed at how much life was written into every detail. Her eyes widened when she spotted a tiny lizard skitter across a sun-warmed stone, disappearing into a crack with a swish of its tail. "It's like the land talks," she whispered. Tayan's lips curved slightly. "Exactly. And if you learn to understand it, you survive. If you ignore it, you perish." Hours passed, and the sun climbed higher. They reached a small canyon where wild horses grazed freely. The animals' coats shimmered in gold and brown tones, and their hooves raised little clouds of dust. Maribel's breath caught at the sight. She had never been so close to such creatures, and yet they seemed unafraid, sensing Tayan's calm presence. "Watch them," Tayan instructed. "See how they move, how they listen. Everything here has rhythm, pattern. Follow it, and you will move safely." Maribel crouched low, mimicking his stance, studying the horses. Her small hands clenched the grass as she tried to absorb their movements, their alertness, their quiet communication. Tayan knelt beside her, his massive shadow falling over her, yet never threatening. "Do not rush," he said softly. "Patience is as powerful as strength." As the afternoon waned, he guided her to a small plateau overlooking a river that sparkled under the sun. "This is life," he said, gesturing to the land below. "Water, food, shelter, all are gifts if you respect them. Take without understanding, and the land will punish you." Maribel nodded, realizing that her previous life full of fear, fire, and loss had left her blind to the world's subtleties. Here, with Tayan, she was learning to see, to listen, to move with purpose. Every rock, every tree, every whisper of wind was a lesson, and every lesson made her feel stronger, braver, alive. By evening, they built a small camp near the river's edge. Tayan showed her how to gather firewood, start a small flame using flint and dry bark, and prepare a simple meal of foraged herbs and fish from the river. Maribel's fingers trembled at first, but under his guidance she learned to handle the tools, to respect the process, and to take pride in her accomplishments. When the fire burned low and the stars began to emerge, Tayan sat beside her, massive, arms resting on his knees. Maribel leaned against his side, feeling the strength and warmth of his presence. "I never thought I could do this," she admitted softly. "You are stronger than you know," Tayan replied. "Strength is not just in muscle. It is in courage, in learning, in standing when the world pushes you down." Maribel looked up at him, the firelight flickering across his bronzed skin and long black hair. She realized that in this vast, untamed land, she was no longer alone. The warrior beside her was more than protector. He was teacher, guide, and companion. Together they could face the plains, the dangers, and the unknown that stretched endlessly before them. As the night deepened, the wind whispered through the canyon, carrying with it the scent of wildflowers and river water. Maribel closed her eyes, feeling a fragile sense of belonging she had never known. The vast wilderness around them was still wild, still dangerous, but with Tayan at her side, it felt like home, alive, demanding, and full of promise. The first light of dawn stretched across the canyon, painting the rocks in soft golds and reds. Maribel stirred beside the fire, wrapped in her shawl, feeling the warmth seep into her chilled bones. Tayan was already awake, kneeling by the riverbank, muscles tensed as he surveyed the plains. His long black hair shimmered in the sunlight, beads catching the glow. Even after weeks together, his presence still made her heart race, not with fear, but with awe and comfort. "Good morning," she whispered, her voice hesitant but filled with the quiet trust she now felt. Tayan glanced at her, a small, almost imperceptible smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "The morning brings opportunity," he said, "and we must take it." Maribel followed him as he led the way through the canyon, teaching her once more to read the land, to feel the wind, to watch the movements of animals as subtle messages. But today felt different. The air carried a promise, a sense that the vast wilderness could no longer hold them in isolation. Today the plains seemed to hum with life and possibility. As they rounded a familiar bend, they saw smoke rising in the distance. Maribel froze. "Is that danger?" she asked. Tayan shook his head slightly. "No, not danger. Life. Someone has built a camp there. Humans, but not hostile." His eyes softened as he turned to her. "You will see. Not all who wander are threats. Some may help if we are careful." They approached cautiously, staying hidden among rocks and shrubs. A small group of travelers sat around a fire, cooking, talking quietly, their voices mingling with the whisper of the wind. Maribel felt a strange mix of fear and excitement. For months she had avoided people, had trusted no one. And yet, Watching them from the safety of Taeyeon's guidance, she felt the stirrings of curiosity, hope, and belonging. Tay in single quotes S hand brushed hers, a silent gesture of reassurance. "We will greet them carefully," he said. "Observe first, then act." Maribel nodded, her heart pounding. She had learned so much from him, the strength in patience, the power of observation, the courage to trust when the land and its guardian said it was safe. Together, they stepped closer. The travelers noticed them almost immediately. A tall man with a kind face stood, bowing slightly. "You two are far from home," he said, his voice warm, not threatening. "The storm last night must have been fierce." Maribel felt a flutter of nervousness, but Taeyeon's hand stayed firm on her shoulder, steadying her. "We seek only shelter," he said, his voice calm, commanding respect without anger. The man nodded. "You are welcome here," he said simply. Maribel's eyes filled with tears she didn't try to hold back. For the first time since the fire, someone offered safety without condition, without judgment. As they joined the campfire, Maribel looked at Taeyeon. He watched her with the same quiet intensity he had from the very beginning, his dark eyes softening as he noticed her small smile. In his presence, she had learned to trust again, to see the beauty in the wilderness and in herself, and to believe that life could still hold hope. That evening, as the sun dipped low behind the canyon walls, Maribel and Taeyeon sat together on a flat rock, watching the sky turn from gold to deep purple. The river glimmered below them, and the wind carried the faint scent of sage and wildflowers. "You have learned much," Taeyeon said, his voice carrying the weight of pride and quiet admiration. "Not just to survive, but to see, to understand." Maribel leaned against him, feeling the steady warmth of his massive frame. "I couldn't have done it without you," she whispered. "I thought I was lost forever." "You were never lost," he replied. "The land and I only waited for you to notice." For the first time, Maribel felt that she truly belonged somewhere, not just in the hidden springs, the canyons, or the plains, but with Taeyeon, with someone who had seen her fear and helped her turn it into courage. The journey had changed them both, forging a bond stronger than the stones around them and as enduring as the endless sky above. As night fell and the stars emerged, Maribel closed her eyes, resting against the giant Apache warrior who had become her protector, teacher, and friend. The vast plains stretched endlessly before them, filled with danger and wonder, but also the promise of a life rebuilt. Together they would face whatever came next, bound by trust, survival, and a new hope that glimmered brighter than the moonlight on the canyon walls. And in that quiet moment, under the sweep of endless stars, Maribel realized she was finally home.